Why did no one answer the radio? Why did silence feel heavier than the bullets hammering the concrete walls? The first rounds had hit like thunder, ripping through plaster and wood, showering the men in dust. A shell of a house was all that stood between them and a storm of militants outside. 6 men crouched low, rifles pressed against shoulders, breathing like cornered animals. They weren't new to combat. They had seen it before: chaos, screaming, the blur of movement and blood. But something about this ambush was different. There was no plan left to follow. No reinforcements close enough to matter. No air support sweeping in from the horizon. It was 6 against 40. Chief Petty Officer Harris leaned into the wall, his arms slick with blood that wasn't stopping, not yet. Sweat stung his eyes as he barked into the radio. "We're pinned down." Static answered him, mocking, cold. He pressed harder, desperate. "Do you copy?" "Repeat." "Pinned inside, low ammo, need extraction now." A pause, then the distant, hollow reply. "Negative, ETA too long, hold position." Hold position. He cursed under his breath. A low growl meant for no one but himself. Hold position meant die here. The team knew it. You could see it in their faces. Alvarez, the youngest of them all, barely out of his teens, glanced at Harris, his lips trembling. "Chief, we're not getting out of this, are we?" His voice cracked, breaking the illusion of invincibility every soldier tries to wear like armor. Harris wanted to lie. He wanted to promise them that the helicopters would be here in minutes, that someone somewhere had their backs. But all he could say was, "We hold, that's all we do, we hold." Bullets cracked against the window frame, showering sparks across the room. And then, less than a mile away, life carried on as though none of this existed. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor of the university library, her world wrapped in books. She was 19, a freshman, barely a woman, still more child than she'd admit. Her textbooks towered higher than her arms could carry, numbers and words swimming on the page. War was headlines to her, distant, abstract. Something men like her father spoke about but never brought to the dinner table. Her father, the Marine, the sniper, the man who had taken her to ranges before she was tall enough to see over the bench. He'd guided her hands on the rifle, whispering about patience, about stillness, about how courage wasn't noise but silence. She thought it was just their ritual, a father's strange way of bonding with his daughter. She never imagined it would matter. Not really. But that afternoon, war came knocking. The cracks of rifles echoed across the campus, sharp, unnatural. Students screamed, scattering into hallways, throwing themselves under desks. Emily froze, her heart hammering in her chest, textbooks tumbling from her lap. She looked up through the wide library windows, and in the distance, beyond the smoke curling into the sky, she saw them. Men, 6 of them, cornered inside a ruined building. Flashes of fire from every side as militants swarmed like shadows, pressing in with ruthless rhythm. Emily's throat tightened. She was supposed to run. Everyone was running, but her feet wouldn't move. She heard his voice instead, her father's voice, sharp as the crack of a rifle. "When everyone else runs, you stand. That's the difference." Her body trembled. Her mind screamed at her to flee. Yet something inside her broke open, something deeper than fear. She moved. The old training range near campus had been abandoned for years, but the storage shed still held relics of her father's time. An old sniper rifle, heavy, cold, waiting. She had seen it 100 times, had lifted it once or twice with awe, but never loaded it, not until today. Her hands shook as she racked the bolt, fingers clumsy, heart hammering so hard it made the rifle quiver. The metal pressed against her shoulder, not like before, not like a game or practice. It felt like destiny, like a burden. She ran, breath tearing through her lungs, the weight of the weapon dragging against her side, toward the sound of gunfire, toward the edge of town where the world was burning. Inside the house, the seals were almost done. Every shot had to be rationed, measured. Every magazine was a countdown to silence. They pressed tighter together, brothers not just by oath but by desperation. Someone muttered a prayer. Someone else whispered the name of a girl back home. And then another sound. Not the frantic spray of AK fire, not the rattling chaos of automatic bursts, but something different, a clean crack, sharp, distant. One enemy fell, then another, a third. The battlefield stuttered. The militants froze, confusion rippling through them like electricity. Harris's head snapped up. His eyes darted toward the rooftops. And there, through dust and smoke, he saw her. A silhouette, prone, hair whipping in the wind. A rifle steady against the concrete lip. Too small, too young, too impossible. Emily. Her world had narrowed into a tunnel. She couldn't hear her own heartbeat anymore. Only her father's lessons replaying like a mantra. Breathe, exhale, squeeze. Each round found its mark. But unlike the paper targets of her childhood, these weren't faceless circles. These were men, breathing, bleeding men. And with every pull of the trigger, a question tore through her. Was she saving lives or losing her own soul? Doubt clawed at her. Was she allowed to do this? Was she crossing a line she could never return from? She felt tears burn her eyes, blurring the scope, but then another burst of enemy fire snapped her back. The SEALs were cornered. They needed her. "This isn't about me," she whispered, voice shaking. "It's about them." She fired again. Inside, Harris felt something he hadn't felt all day. Hope. He shouted into his radio, his voice booming over the chaos. "We've got cover. Move, move." The men bolted from their crumbling shelter, sprinting through the alleyways as Emily's rifle carved a path for them. Her body shook between every shot, but her aim never wavered. Every squeeze was a war between the terrified college girl she had been that morning and the sniper her father had trained without even knowing why. Finally, silence. The last bursts of fire sputtered out. The militants scattered, dragging their wounded into shadows. Smoke rose into the evening air, thick and acrid, leaving behind only silence. The SEALs crouched, panting, alive. Against all odds, alive. They looked up to the rooftop, to the figure who had kept death at bay. Harris climbed slowly, boots crunching broken glass, heart pounding with a question he didn't know how to ask. And there she was, a girl, wide eyes filled with tears, a rifle trembling in her hands. She looked less like a warrior and more like a child who had stumbled into a nightmare. "Ma'am," Harris said softly, lowering himself to one knee. His voice cracked with gratitude, with disbelief. "You just saved 6 men's lives." Emily blinked at him, her lips barely moving. "I didn't. I wasn't supposed to be here." His hand rested on her trembling shoulder, steady, grounding. Sometimes the right person's never supposed to be there, but when they are, they change everything. They moved her with them, their formation tight around her fragile frame. Soldiers who had been prepared to die now guarded a girl who had chosen not to run. And though her body shook, though her mind reeled, she had given them something no radio, no command, no miracle had promised. She had given them another chance. That night Emily sat alone. The rifle lay across her knees, heavy, unbearable. She replayed every shot in her mind, every face that fell because of her. Pride tangled with horror. Relief wrestled with guilt. She wondered if she would ever sleep again. But then Harris's eyes returned to her memory. That look, that gratitude, that acknowledgement that she had mattered, that she had made a difference when no one else could. And in the silence of that night, Emily finally understood something her father had always tried to teach her. Courage isn't about wanting the fight. It's about stepping into it when you're needed most, even if you're afraid, even if you're unprepared. She wasn't just a girl with books anymore. She had carried lives on her shoulders, and she hadn't let them fall. Why was she still shaking, long after the gunfire had stopped? The SEALs moved in silence, boots crunching against broken glass, their formation tight around Emily. To them, survival was routine. Another mission, another scar. But for her, every second replayed louder, heavier, like echoes trapped inside her chest. She couldn't make her hands stop trembling. The rifle still clung to her palms, as though the metal itself refused to let her go. She wanted to drop it, to run from it, but her grip wouldn't release. It was part of her now. The men didn't speak at first. They exchanged glances, some curious, some cautious. Who was this girl? Where had she come from? How had she been so precise? They had no answers, only gratitude too raw to voice. Harris kept stealing glances at her as they moved. He'd seen rookies in combat before, men who froze, who cracked, who didn't make it home. But this girl, she had stood where no one else would. Still, Harris knew what came next. The aftermath was always worse. When the adrenaline faded, when the silence closed in, that's when the weight crushed hardest. They ducked into the shell of another building, safer than the last. For a moment, the war outside was just a muffled hum. Harris signaled the men to secure the perimeter, then turned to Emily. "You hurt?" he asked, voice steady but soft. She shook her head. Her lips parted but no sound came. Her throat was tight, locked. She only shook her head again. "Good," he said. "You're safe now." Safe, the word rang hollow. Safe meant nothing when her chest still burned with images she couldn't erase. Every pull of the trigger replayed in her mind. Every face that fell. Her breath hitched, sharp, breaking the silence. Alvarez, the youngest, crouched across from her. His helmet was cracked, his cheeks streaked with blood, but his eyes softened when he looked at her. "You saved us," he whispered, almost like he was telling himself. "You actually saved us." Emily's gaze dropped to the rifle across her knees. Saved. Was that what she had done? Or had she just crossed a line she could never step back from? Harris studied her quietly. He saw the storm building in her, fear, guilt, confusion. He had carried it himself once, years ago. He knew what it did to a person. The worst wounds weren't the ones bleeding. They were the ones no medic could reach. Outside, distant shouting echoed through the streets. Militants regrouping. Harris's instincts sharpened. They weren't safe yet. "Pack up," he ordered. His voice snapped the team back into motion. "We move west toward extraction." The men readied themselves, weapons reloaded, eyes scanning every corner. Emily sat frozen until Harris crouched beside her again. "You can stay here," he said low. "We'll circle back once it's clear. No shame in that." Her eyes flicked to his, wide, raw. For a moment she wanted to say yes, to stay, to let them go, to forget this day ever happened. But then she heard it again, the memory of her father's voice, soft but unyielding. "When everyone else runs, you stand." She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "I'll come." Harris nodded once. Not approval, not pride, just understanding. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." They slipped into the night. The town was a maze of shadows, every alley hiding danger. Smoke curled from rooftops, windows shattered, walls scorched black. Emily followed close, her heart slamming against her ribs. Every noise made her flinch, the scrape of boots, the distant rattle of a truck, the sharp crack of a gun too far to matter yet too close to ignore. The men moved with precision, silent signals, hand gestures. Emily mimicked their crouches, their halts, trying to shrink herself into invisibility. But inside she was anything but invisible. Every sense screamed awake. Every breath felt stolen. At one corner they froze, voices, enemy patrol. Harris raised his fist, signaling silence. Emily's knees ached as she pressed against the wall, trying to control her breathing. She could hear them, shouts in a language she didn't know, laughter twisted with menace. Her palms slicked against the rifle stock. She remembered the crack of her shots, the way bodies had dropped. Her chest tightened. Could she do it again if she had to, or would her hands refuse this time? The patrol passed. Harris signaled forward. Relief washed through her, but it was brief. The streets weren't empty, they were alive, watching. Every window could hide a muzzle. Every rooftop could mask a sniper. Hours seemed to stretch as they moved. Tension wound tighter with every step. Finally, Harris raised his hand again. They ducked into a courtyard, sheltered for the moment. The men slumped, catching their breath. Emily dropped beside them, lungs burning. No one spoke, silence heavy, thick, until Alvarez broke it with a whisper, "What's your name?" Emily blinked, startled. She hadn't expected the question. For a second she forgot. She had been girl, sniper, savior. But she still had a name. "Emily," she said softly, almost apologetic. The men nodded, as if anchoring the name in their memory, a name to the face that had saved them. "Emily," Alvarez repeated like testing it. A small smile touched his lips, the first hint of hope since the ambush. "Emily." But Emily only stared at the ground. The name felt strange in this place, out of place, like she was living someone else's life. Harris kept his eyes on the street beyond, but his mind lingered on her. She had stepped into their war, untrained, unprepared, yet she had done what even seasoned soldiers sometimes failed to do. Still, he knew the cost. No one left a moment like that unchanged. When they finally moved again, Emily felt the weight growing heavier. Not just the rifle, not just the fear, but the knowledge of what she carried inside now. She was no longer the girl with books on her lap, safe in the library. That girl was gone. The night stretched on. They pushed block by block, each step a victory, each shadow a threat. Emily's body ached, her mind frayed, but she forced herself forward. At last, in the distance, the faint glimmer of flares marked the extraction zone. Safety, rescue, the promise of an end. But Harris knew better. Nothing in war ended that neatly. And Emily felt it too. The closer they drew, the more her heart sank, because she knew this wasn't over. Not for her, not inside. Why did the closer they came to safety, the more dangerous it felt? The flares glowed faintly in the distance, rising like ghostly lanterns over the horizon. Extraction. The word carried a promise, but Harris knew better than to trust promises. Distance meant obstacles. Obstacles meant time. And time was the one thing they were running out of. Emily followed in silence, the rifle digging into her shoulder with every step. The night air bit cold against her skin, though sweat still clung to her neck. Every sound scraped across her nerves. A barking dog, a slammed door, the echo of boots in alleys they didn't enter. It all felt like a heartbeat before a shot. Her legs burned, but she refused to slow down. Every time she thought about stopping, she remembered the faces of those men in the house, their desperation, their fear. She remembered the weight of their survival on her shoulders, and she forced herself forward. Harris moved like a shadow, gestures sharp, movements precise. He had a way of seeming calm even in chaos. Emily found herself watching him, mimicking the way he crouched low, the way he scanned corners. If he could stay steady, maybe she could too. But inside she was unraveling. The images wouldn't stop replaying. The scope, the faces, the moment after the trigger. She had never thought death had a sound, but now she knew it was silence. That breathless pause when a body fell and the world seemed to wait for the next shot. Was she proud? Was she horrified? She couldn't decide, and maybe that was worse. At the next stop, Harris crouched beside her. His voice was low, meant only for her. "You holding up?" She hesitated. Her instinct was to say yes, to prove she wasn't weak, that she belonged here, but her lips trembled. The truth pushed out instead. "I don't know." Harris nodded slowly, not judgment, just recognition. "That's honest," he said. "That's enough." The word startled her. Honest. Enough. No one had ever told her that before, not in school, not in life. Her father had demanded precision, discipline, control. Harris only asked for honesty. For a brief moment, she felt the ground steady under her feet. But the world doesn't grant peace for long. A shot cracked in the distance, then another. The team dropped instantly, pressing against walls, eyes darting. Harris raised his fist. Emily's chest clenched. Her finger brushed the trigger, though her rifle stayed lowered. She searched the rooftops, the alleys, the shadows. Her heart pounded louder than her thoughts. Silence. Then footsteps, fast, closing in. The militants hadn't given up after all. Harris cursed under his breath. They'd been tracked. He signaled the team to fall back, weaving through side streets, shifting direction. The extraction point wasn't straight anymore, it was a maze. Emily ran, her lungs tearing, her mind split between terror and focus. Every time she stumbled, Harris's hand steadied her. Every time she faltered, Alvarez whispered encouragement. They weren't leaving her behind. That knowledge cut deep. She wasn't just baggage to them, she mattered. But what if she failed them now? Gunfire erupted again, closer this time. Bullets sparked off concrete, ricocheting into the night. The men dove into cover, returning fire with practiced bursts. Emily dropped behind a crumbled wall, her hands trembling as she lifted the rifle. She found a target in her scope, too close, moving fast. Her finger froze. It wasn't like before, distant, detached. This man was near enough she could see his eyes, wide with rage, with something almost human. Emily hesitated. Could she take another life? Could she cross that line again? The militant raised his weapon, aimed at Harris. Emily squeezed. The recoil jolted through her. The man fell. Harris lived. Her stomach lurched, her throat burned, but she didn't lower the rifle, not this time. The fight pushed on, blocks turning into battlefields, every corner another risk. Emily fired when she had to, never more, never less. Her shots were still steady, but inside, everyone cracked her open wider. By the time they found shelter again, the world felt blurred, smeared in smoke and blood. Emily collapsed against the wall, her body shaking, tears streaking her cheeks. No one said a word. The men sat in silence too, their eyes distant, their shoulders sagging. War had a way of breaking everyone, even the ones trained for it. Finally Alvarez spoke. His voice was hoarse, fragile. "Back home I was supposed to start classes too." He gave a weak laugh. "Not like this, though." Emily looked up at him. Their eyes met. In that moment she realized they weren't that different. He was barely older than her. A soldier, yes, but still just a boy who should have been in lecture halls, not alleys filled with smoke. Her chest tightened. How many like him had already fallen? How many more would? Harris broke the silence. "We keep moving at first light." His voice was steel again, unyielding, but his eyes softened when they landed on Emily. "You've done enough. You don't have to carry this further." Emily shook her head, firm despite her tears. "If I stop now, it'll all come back. I have to keep going." Harris studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. Respect. Not pity, respect. The night stretched thin, hours bleeding into one another. They took turns resting, one man always on watch. Emily lay awake, staring at the stars through the crumbled roof. Every flicker of light reminded her of the shots she had fired, of the faces she would never forget. She didn't know if she was becoming stronger or breaking apart, maybe both. Dawn bled into the sky, pale and unforgiving. They rose, stiff, exhausted, but alive. The extraction zone was still miles away, but closer now, close enough to hope. As they moved, Emily felt the weight of her rifle differently, not as destiny, not as burden, but as responsibility, a choice she had made again and again. She didn't know who she would be when this was over, but she knew one thing. She would never be the same girl who dropped her books on a library floor. Why did morning light make everything feel more dangerous? The night had hidden them, given them shadows to slip through, silence to shield their steps, but dawn revealed too much. The streets stretched wide, exposed. The buildings rose like watchtowers, every window a possible barrel, every rooftop a vantage point for eyes they couldn't see. The SEALs moved in a tight column, low and fast, rifles sweeping each corner. Emily followed close, the rifle pressed against her chest. Her body ached from the hours of running, crawling, firing, but her mind was sharper than ever. Too sharp. Every detail stabbed at her nerves. The rusted door swinging in the wind, the glint of glass in the gutter, the faint smell of smoke that never seemed to leave. She had thought surviving the night was enough. But survival wasn't a finish line. It was just another mile on a road without end. Harris raised his fist. Halt. They pressed into cover as a truck rumbled down the street. Militants in the back, weapons slung loose, eyes scanning. Emily's breath froze. She crouched lower, trying to make herself invisible. The men didn't move. They were statues waiting. The truck rolled past. The seconds dragged like hours, and then it was gone. Emily let out a trembling exhale. She hadn't even realized she was holding her breath. Alvarez gave her a faint smile. "First time hiding from a convoy," he whispered. She almost laughed, though it came out more like a sob. First time for a lot of things. But the relief was short-lived. Gunfire erupted. Not at them, further down the street. The sound tore through the quiet, sharp and chaotic. Harris's head snapped toward it, his jaw tightening. Another fight. Another unit caught, maybe civilians, maybe soldiers. He didn't know. He couldn't afford to know. "We keep moving," Harris ordered, his voice clipped. Emily swallowed hard. What if they need help? Harris's eyes met hers, hard and unyielding. "We can't save everyone. We save who we can. Right now, that's us." The words landed heavy. She wanted to argue, to demand they turn back, but she didn't. Because she saw it in his face, the truth of war. Sometimes survival wasn't about being brave. It was about making impossible choices and living with them. They slipped away from the sound of battle, guilt dragging behind them like chains. By midday, the sun was high, merciless. Their canteens were nearly empty, their bodies worn thin. Emily's legs trembled with every step, her lips cracked from thirst. Yet she refused to fall behind. Pride, or maybe shame, kept her moving. Harris finally called a halt in the ruins of a school building. The chalkboards were shattered, desks overturned, walls scarred with bullet holes. Once, children had learned here. Now it was only rubble and silence. The men collapsed against the walls, weary, silent. Emily slid down beside them, her rifle across her knees. She stared at the chalk dust on the floor, faint traces of lessons long erased. Alvarez broke the quiet. "I used to hate school," he said, forcing a weak laugh. "Now I'd give anything to sit in a boring classroom again." Emily smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. She thought of her textbooks scattered on the library floor. Would they still be there when she returned? Would she ever return? Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of graduating, of building a life far from war. Now she wasn't sure if she even belonged in that world anymore. Harris moved among them, checking wounds, rationing the last of their water. When he reached Emily, he crouched low. "You need rest," he said. She shook her head. "If I rest, I'll think." His eyes softened. "Thinking isn't always the enemy." "Here it feels like it is," she whispered. He didn't argue. He only nodded, then stood to take first watch. For a moment, Emily let her eyes close. The silence of the ruined school wrapped around her. But sleep didn't come. Only memories. Her father's hands guiding hers, his voice teaching her patience. Her mother's laughter in the kitchen, warm and distant. The echo of the shots she had fired, louder than both. When the team moved again, the air felt heavier. Shadows stretched long across the streets. Danger pressed closer. And then it came. The ambush was sudden. A burst of fire from above, bullets sparking against stone. The men dove for cover, shouting, returning fire. Emily dropped flat, the rifle already rising. Her heart pounded, but her hands moved steady. Through her scope, she found the shooter. A rooftop. A figure braced against the edge. She exhaled, squeezed. The recoil kicked back. The figure fell. But more followed. Another rooftop, another alley. They were surrounded. The SEALs fired with precision, holding ground, but the numbers pressed heavier. Emily shifted positions, firing again and again. Her hands shook between shots, her chest a storm of fear and focus. One militant broke through the line, charging. Emily swung her rifle, too slow. Alvarez tackled him, the two rolling across the dirt. A knife flashed. Emily's scream tore from her throat as she raised her rifle, then froze. Too close. She could hit Alvarez. Her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't move. Then Harris was there, swift and brutal, dragging the enemy back and ending it. Alvarez gasped, blood streaking his arm but alive. Emily's stomach turned. She had hesitated. She could have saved him faster, she could have been the one, but she hadn't pulled the trigger. As the fight died down, silence crawled back in. The militants scattered, leaving bodies and smoke behind. The SEALs regrouped, panting, bloody but alive. Emily stood frozen, her rifle limp at her side. Harris approached her, his gaze sharp. "Why didn't you shoot?" Her lips trembled. I was afraid." He studied her, his silence heavier than words. She braced for anger, for disappointment. Instead, he said quietly, "Fear keeps you human. Don't lose that." Tears stung her eyes. Human. She didn't feel human. She felt broken, torn between two selves, the girl who read books in the library and the one who carried a rifle through smoke. As they moved again, Emily lagged behind, her thoughts a storm. Every choice weighed on her. Every hesitation haunted her. She didn't know who she was becoming, only that she could never go back. That night, as they huddled in the ruins of another building, Emily sat apart, staring at the stars. Her hands still shook. She whispered into the dark, to her father, to herself. "Am I doing this right, or am I losing myself?" The silence gave no answer, only the faint sound of breathing around her, the weight of survival pressing on them all. And in that silence, Emily understood something she hadn't before. Survival wasn't victory, it was sacrifice, and every step forward meant leaving some part of yourself behind. Why did the road to safety always feel like it was pulling them deeper into danger? The town seemed endless. Street after street, alley after alley, every turn promising an end that never came. The flares of the extraction zone still glimmered faintly on the horizon, but each step toward them cost more. More strength, more blood, more pieces of who they were. The men were exhausted. Their faces were pale beneath the dirt and sweat, their movements slower, heavier. Harris pushed them on, his voice firm, unyielding, but even he moved with a limp now, his sleeve still soaked with blood. Emily trailed close, the rifle pressed to her chest. Her body felt carved from stone, every muscle screaming, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Every shadow whispered threat. Every sound pulled her back to the moment she froze, when Alvarez had nearly died. Her stomach twisted. She kept seeing his eyes, wide with panic, the flash of the knife. She had hesitated. What if Harris hadn't been there? Would Alvarez be gone now because of her? She wanted to believe Harris's words, that fear kept her human, but all she felt was weak. They ducked into a narrow alley, walls scorched black, the air heavy with the stench of burned wood and cordite. Harris raised his fist, signaling halt. The men crouched low, eyes scanning. Emily pressed against the wall, her breath shallow. The silence pressed in, thick, suffocating, too quiet. Then the world exploded. Gunfire ripped down from the rooftops. Bullets sparked off stone, chewing the alley into shards. The men dove for cover, returning fire in sharp bursts. Emily dropped flat, the rifle braced against the dirt. Through her scope she saw them, 3 militants on a rooftop, rifles braced. She exhaled, squeezed. One fell. She shifted, fired again. Another dropped. The third ducked out of sight. But more poured in from the street ahead. Shadows moving fast, too many. The SEALs fired back. Their shots measured, precise, but they were pinned again. Harris barked orders, voice steady despite the chaos. Alvarez reloaded with shaking hands, his arms still bandaged from the knife. Emily shifted her aim, her breath ragged. She fired again and again, carving gaps for the men to move. But there were too many. The air burned with smoke and dust. A grenade clattered into the alley. "Down!" Harris roared. They dove for cover as the blast shook the ground, shards of stone raining down. Emily's ears rang, her vision blurred. She blinked hard, forcing the world back into focus. And then she saw it. Alvarez slumped against the wall, his chest heaving, blood spreading fast across his vest. No, Emily's scream tore from her throat as she crawled to him, hands trembling. No, no, stay with me. Alvarez's eyes fluttered, glassy with pain. He tried to speak, but only blood filled his mouth. Emily pressed her hands to his chest, desperate, shaking. You'll be okay, just stay awake, you'll be okay. Harris was there in seconds, his face grim, his hands steady as he tried to stop the bleeding. But Emily saw it in his eyes. He knew. Alvarez gasped, his hand grasping weakly at Emily's sleeve. She leaned close, tears streaming. His lips moved, faint, broken. Thank you. And then he was gone. The alley seemed to collapse in on itself. The gunfire dulled. The shouts blurred. All Emily could hear was the silence where Alvarez's voice should have been. Her hands were slick with blood, her chest heaving with sobs she couldn't control. She had saved him once. She had failed him now. Harris pulled her back, his grip firm, dragging her behind cover. Emily, listen to me. He's gone. We can't stop. If we stop, we all die here. She shook her head, sobbing. I could have. No, Harris snapped, his eyes blazing. This isn't on you. Don't carry that weight. Not his, not now. But the words couldn't reach her. They slid off the walls of guilt already rising inside. The fight raged on. The SEALs pushed back, their fire cutting through the militants, forcing them to retreat. The alley filled with smoke, the stench of gunpowder and blood choking the air. At last the shooting stopped. The survivors crouched in silence, their breaths ragged. One less now. The space where Alvarez should have been hung heavy, unbearable. Emily sat against the wall, her hands still shaking, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She stared at the rifle across her knees, the blood on her palms. She had thought pulling the trigger was the hardest part. She was wrong. The hardest part was losing someone after you'd already saved them once. Harris knelt in front of her, his face lined with exhaustion, his voice quiet but steady. You did everything you could, more than anyone had a right to expect. Her eyes burned. Then why isn't he here? Harris's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Some questions had no answers. The team moved again, slower now, heavier. Every step forward was shadowed by the absence behind them. Emily followed, her body numb, her mind raw. The extraction zone was closer than ever. The promise of safety was almost real. But for Emily, safety no longer meant what it once did. Because no matter where they went, no matter what they survived, she would carry Alvarez with her. That night, as they huddled in the ruins of another building, Emily sat apart, staring into the dark. The others rested in silence, their grief tucked behind closed eyes. She whispered into the night, her voice breaking. If I had been faster, if I hadn't hesitated. The silence gave no answer. But deep inside, she knew the truth Harris hadn't said. This was war, and war didn't care about if. It only cared about what you carried forward. Emily wiped her hands against her pants, the blood still staining. She picked up the rifle, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. For Alvarez, for the men still alive, for the promise that his death wouldn't be for nothing. She wasn't sure if she was stronger now or just more broken, but she knew one thing. She couldn't turn back, not anymore. Why did silence after loss feel louder than any gunfire? The team moved through the ruined streets like ghosts, shadows of themselves. They didn't speak Alvarez's name. They didn't have to. His absence walked beside them, a seventh figure carved in memory. Every step forward was heavier, every corner darker, every breath another reminder that survival demanded sacrifice. Emily trailed behind Harris, the rifle pressed tight against her chest. Her palms still carried Alvarez's blood, even though she'd scrubbed them raw against her pants. The stain wouldn't leave. Maybe it never would. She kept hearing his last words, faint and broken. Thank you. Thank you for what? For failing him. For not being enough. Her chest tightened with every thought, her throat burning as she forced her legs to keep moving. The sun crawled high, burning over the shattered town. The heat pressed down, suffocating. Their canteens were nearly empty, their food long gone. Hunger gnawed at their insides, but no one complained. Complaints were wasted breath, and breath was all they had left. Harris called a halt in the shadow of a collapsed building. The men crouched low, eyes scanning rooftops, weapons ready. Emily sank against the wall, her body trembling with exhaustion. One of the older SEALs, Ramirez, pulled a strip of cloth from his kit, handing it to her silently. She frowned, confused, until she realized her cheek was bleeding. She hadn't even felt it. She pressed the cloth against her skin, whispering, "Thank you." Ramirez gave a nod, his expression unreadable. Gratitude wasn't something they shared often, not out loud. The silence stretched, until finally one of the men muttered, "We should have saved him, should have done more." The word struck like a blade. Emily's chest clenched, guilt twisting deeper. She lowered her head, staring at the rifle across her knees. But Harris's voice cut through, firm, sharp. "Enough. We did what we could. Alvarez knew the risk. We all do. You carry him forward by finishing this. Nothing else." His eyes met Emily's for a moment, holding her gaze steady. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. She knew the words were meant for her. They moved again. The streets grew narrower, tighter. Smoke clung to the air, acrid and choking. Every sound sharpened their nerves, the flutter of birds scattering, the creak of a broken door in the wind. Danger pressed closer. And then it came. Gunfire erupted from ahead, the street exploding in dust and shards. The team dove into cover, bullets slamming into the walls. Harris barked orders, the men returning fire in disciplined bursts. Emily pressed against the rubble, her chest heaving. The world tilted between terror and focus. She raised her rifle, found a target in her scope, exhaled, fired. A figure dropped, another. Her hands shook, but her aim stayed true. The militants pressed harder, flooding the street. Harris cursed, signaling for them to fall back. "Move, keep moving." Emily scrambled after them, heart pounding, legs burning. The fight spilled through alleys, across courtyards, every step a battle. At one corner, a militant charged from the side, rifle raised. Emily swung her weapon up, too slow. Harris moved, firing first. The man fell, but Harris stumbled, blood splattering across his leg. "Chief," one of the men shouted, rushing to him. "I'm fine," Harris growled, though his limp worsened with every step. Emily's chest clenched. She wanted to help, to do something, but there was no time. The fight pressed on. They reached another building, ducking inside, barricading doors with broken furniture. For a moment, silence returned. Only the rasp of breath, the pounding of hearts. Harris collapsed against the wall, his face pale, sweat dripping. The wound in his leg was worse than he admitted. Ramirez crouched beside him, tearing fabric to bind it. "You're losing blood," he muttered. "I've lost worse," Harris gritted out. His eyes flicked to Emily. "You on watch?" She nodded quickly, moving to the window. Her body trembled, but her eyes sharpened. She scanned the streets, searching for movement. The men tended to Harris, their faces grim. Emily listened, guilt gnawing at her. First Alvarez, now Harris. How many more would fall before this ended? Her hands tightened on the rifle. She whispered to herself, a vow no one else could hear. "No more, not if I can stop it." The hours dragged, the sun bleeding into late afternoon. They rationed sips of water, bites of stale rations. Emily didn't taste anything. Her stomach was stone. Finally, Harris gave the order. "We move again at dusk. That's our window." The men nodded, weary but determined. Emily swallowed hard, gripping the rifle tighter. Dusk. Another chance to live. Another chance to lose more. When the sky darkened, they slipped back into the streets. Shadows stretched long, cloaking their movements. The town seemed to hold its breath, waiting. They moved fast, weaving through alleys, avoiding open ground. Emily's body screamed with every step, but she forced herself forward. For Harris, for Alvarez, for herself. And then gunfire again. An ambush. Militants from both sides, rifles blazing. The SEALs dropped into cover, firing back. Emily hit the ground, her rifle rising, eyes searching. She found one target, fired. Another. Another. But the enemy pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming. Harris shouted orders, his voice raw with strain. Push forward, keep moving. Emily crawled to another position, firing again. Her body shook, her ears rang, but her focus sharpened. She didn't hesitate now. Every shot was a choice, and she made it. At last the militants broke, scattering back into the shadows. The street fell silent again, littered with bodies and smoke. The SEALs regrouped, panting, bloodied but alive. Harris limped worse now, his face pale, but his eyes still burned with fire. Emily stood among them, her rifle heavy in her hands, her chest heaving. She had fired more rounds than she could count. She had killed more men than she ever thought possible. And yet her hands were steady. She looked down at the blood on her palms, dried now, cracked into her skin. Alvarez's blood, Harris's blood, her own. She wasn't the same girl anymore. Not the one who had dropped her books in the library, not the one who had hesitated. She was something else now, something she didn't fully understand. As they pushed forward again, the extraction zone closer than ever, Emily whispered into the night, her voice steady, fierce. For Alvarez, for all of you, I'll see this through. And for the first time, she believed it. Why did the final mile always feel like the longest? The horizon glowed faintly with the signal of safety, flares marking the extraction zone. They were close. So close that Emily could almost feel the thrum of helicopter blades in her imagination, the rush of air, the promise of escape. But the closer they came, the more the streets closed in, tighter, narrower, as if the town itself refused to let them go. Harris limped heavily now. Every step was a fight. The bandage on his leg was soaked through, crimson bleeding into the fabric, and though he refused to admit it, his face told the truth. He was fatting. The men knew it, Emily knew it, but no one said it out loud because saying it would make it real. Emily stayed near him, her rifle tight in her grip. Every instinct screamed to help him, to shoulder his weight, but she didn't. He wouldn't let her. He still carried himself like the leader, even if his body betrayed him. Ramirez glanced back, muttering under his breath. Extractions close just a little further. But Harris shook his head. Don't think about distance, think about survival, one step at a time. Emily swallowed hard, forcing her legs to keep moving. One step, then another. She focused on the rhythm, tried not to think about the blood soaking into the dirt with every print Harris left behind. The silence didn't last. A shot cracked from above, then another. Bullets rained down from rooftops, sparking against stone. The team dove into cover, returning fire instantly. Contact, Ramirez roared. Emily dropped flat, her rifle braced against rubble. Through her scope, she saw them, dozens of militants pouring from alleys, flanking from both sides. Her stomach lurched. They weren't just being hunted anymore. They were being trapped. Harris gritted his teeth, voice booming despite his weakness. Hold position, lay down fire. The alley erupted in chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the dark, the stench of gunpowder thick in the air. The SEALs fired with precision, but the enemy was relentless, their numbers pressing harder. Emily exhaled, squeezed. One fell, then another. She shifted, firing again, her body trembling but her aim steady. Every shot carved space, bought seconds. But the militants kept coming. A grenade clattered into the alley. Emily's breath froze. Without thinking, Ramirez lunged, grabbing it, hurling it back. The explosion ripped through the street, shattering windows, sending dust raining down. Emily's ears rang, her vision blurred, but when she blinked back into focus, she saw Ramirez on the ground, his body twisted, unmoving. Her chest cracked open. Another loss, another name carved into silence. Harris shouted over the gunfire, his voice raw. We can't hold here. We move now. The men pressed forward, dragging Harris with them. Emily covered the rear, her rifle spitting fire, her eyes burning with tears she couldn't stop. The fight spilled into another street, wider open, too open. The militants poured after them, shouts echoing, gunfire chasing. Harris stumbled, nearly collapsing. Emily darted to his side, grabbing his arm, steadying him despite his protests. His weight pressed heavy against her, but she refused to let go. "Keep going," she shouted, her voice breaking. The team pushed toward the faint glow of the extraction flares, safety so close, and yet. The street ahead erupted with more figures, militants blocking the path, rifles raised. Trapped. For a moment despair clawed at Emily's throat. There was no way out, too many, too close. Then Harris's hand gripped her shoulder, his voice hoarse, strained. "Emily, look at me." She turned, eyes wide, heart pounding. "You've got this," he said. His voice was steady even as his body failed. "You see the field, you know what to do, lead them." Her chest seized. "I can't." "You already have," Harris cut in fierce. "Every shot you fired, every step you took, you've been leading without even knowing it. Now finish it." Bullets sparked against stone, enemy shouts closing in. Emily's hands shook on the rifle, her heart hammering. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a soldier. She was just a girl. But Alvarez's face flashed in her mind. Ramirez's. Harris's blood soaking the dirt. She wasn't just a girl anymore. Her fear hardened into something else. She raised her rifle, her voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. "On me, push left, break their line." The men obeyed without hesitation. Emily surged forward, firing, her shots precise, carving a gap in the wall of militants. The SEALs followed, pouring through the opening, returning fire with lethal precision. The alley became a storm of dust and gunfire, but Emily didn't falter. She couldn't. Her world narrowed to breath and trigger, movement and survival. She fired, shifted, fired again. The militants faltered, their line breaking under the sudden push. "Go," she shouted, her throat raw. "Move now." The SEALs surged forward, dragging Harris with them. Emily covered their flank, her rifle cracking again and again, each shot a promise that she wouldn't let anyone else fall. At last the enemy line shattered. The survivors scattered into shadows, their shouts fading. The street fell silent again, littered with bodies, smoke rising into the night. The SEALs collapsed behind cover, panting, alive. Emily dropped to her knees, the rifle trembling in her hands. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred with tears, but she was still breathing. They all were. Harris leaned against the wall, pale and weak, but his eyes burned with pride. "You led them," he whispered. "You led us out." Emily shook her head, tears spilling. I didn't have a choice." Harris's hand found hers, steady despite the tremor. "No one ever does. That's what makes it courage." She bowed her head, sobbing quietly, the rifle heavy across her lap. The extraction zone was close now, so close she could almost hear the rotors. But Emily knew the hardest part wasn't reaching safety. It was living with what it took to get there. Why did safety feel the hardest to reach, even when it was right in front of them? The flares burned brighter now, glowing against the night sky like distant stars. The extraction zone. Salvation. The sound of helicopter rotors echoed faintly, carried on the wind. For the first time, survival wasn't just a hope, it was real. But Harris could barely stand. His face was pale, his steps faltering. Every time he stumbled, the men caught him, pulling him forward. Emily stayed close, her hand gripping his arm, her shoulder pressed against his to steady him. He still barked orders, still gave signals, but his voice was weaker now, like the last embers of a fire fighting not to fade. The team moved in silence, every sense on edge. They knew the truth. The closer they got, the more likely the enemy would throw everything at them. No one surrendered prey this close to escape. And they were right. The first shots came from the tree line near the open field. Muzzle flashes tore through the dark. Bullets snapped overhead. The team dove for cover, returning fire, but the field between them and the extraction zone stretched wide, exposed, impossible. Emily pressed flat against the dirt, her heart slamming in her chest. She lifted her rifle, scanning the tree line. Figures moved between shadows, dozens of them. Too many. "We'll never make it across," one of the men muttered, panic creeping into his voice. Harris gritted his teeth, his voice hoarse but steady. "We don't stop now, we fight through." Emily's chest tightened. She remembered Alvarez's last breath, Ramirez's sacrifice, the weight of Harris's blood on her hands. If they fell here, all of it, all of them, would be for nothing. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, sharp, unyielding. "When everyone else runs, you stand." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she steadied the rifle. She had stood before. She would stand again. "Cover me," she whispered. The men turned, startled. "What are you?" But she was already moving. Emily crawled to the edge of the rubble, rifle braced, eyes locked on the tree line. She exhaled, squeezed. One shot. A figure dropped. Another. Another. Her aim was steady, her focus absolute. The militants faltered, their fire pausing as they realized someone was hunting them. "Now," Emily shouted, her voice cracking through the chaos. "Move across, go." The SEALs didn't hesitate. They surged into the field, dragging Harris with them, sprinting through the hail of fire. Emily covered them, her rifle cracking again and again, each shot carving space, each second bought with her courage. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. By the time the team reached the far side, Emily's body shook with exhaustion. She sprinted after them, bullets tearing the dirt at her heels, her legs threatening to give out. But she made it. She dove into cover, collapsing beside Harris, gasping for air. The helicopters were closer now. The roar of rotors thundered through the night, a sound like salvation. But the militants weren't done. They poured from the tree line, dozens of them, determined to finish what they had started. The SEALs fired with everything they had left, their magazines running dry. Emily pressed against the dirt, her rifle hot in her hands, her body trembling with every shot. She didn't think anymore. She didn't hesitate. She just fought. One fell. Another. Her tears blurred the scope, but she didn't stop. For Alvarez, for Ramirez, for Harris, for all of them. The helicopters swooped low, searchlights cutting through the dark. A storm of gunfire ripped into the militants, shredding the tree line. The battlefield erupted into chaos, dust and smoke swallowing everything. And then it was over. The last militant scattered, vanishing into shadows. The gunfire faded. The only sound was the thrum of rotors and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The SEALs pulled Harris onto the waiting helicopter, their movements urgent, desperate. Emily followed, her body numb, her mind a blur. She collapsed into the seat, clutching the rifle across her lap. As the helicopter lifted, the town shrank beneath them, a shattered maze of smoke and blood. Emily stared down, her eyes burning, her chest tight. She had walked into that town a student, a girl with books in her lap. She was leaving it something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. Harris lay beside her, his face pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes found hers, steady, unwavering. "You saved us," he whispered. Emily shook her head, tears spilling. I couldn't let you die." "That's what saving is," Harris rasped. His hand gripped hers, weak but firm. "Never forget that." The words cut deep, carving a truth she hadn't wanted to face. She had killed, she had lost, she had bled, but she had also saved. When the helicopters touched down at base, medics swarmed Harris, rushing him away. The SEALs staggered off, silent, their faces hollow with grief and exhaustion. Emily stood alone on the tarmac, the rifle heavy in her hands, the night wind cold against her skin. No one cheered, no one celebrated. Survival wasn't victory, it was just survival. Later, sitting alone in a dim barracks, Emily stared at her hands. The blood was gone, scrubbed clean, but she could still feel it. She wondered if she always would. She replayed every shot in her mind, every face that fell, every name she would never forget. Alvarez, Ramirez, the ones she had killed, the ones she couldn't save. Her chest tightened, her throat aching. She didn't know who she was anymore. Not the girl in the library, not the sniper her father had raised. Something between, something broken but unyielding. She whispered into the silence, her voice trembling. Was it worth it? The silence didn't answer, but in her heart she felt the truth. Worth wasn't in the lives she had taken. It was in the lives still breathing. Harris, the men who walked beside her, the chance for them to go home. And maybe, one day, for her to find home again too. She lifted the rifle one last time, staring at it. Heavy, unforgiving, a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she had carried. She set it down gently, her hands lingering before pulling away. Sometimes courage isn't in holding on. It's in knowing when to let go. Emily lay back, her eyes burning, her chest heavy. She didn't know if she would sleep. She didn't know if the nightmares would ever stop. But she knew one thing. Courage wasn't about wanting the fight. It was about stepping into it when no one else would, even if you're afraid, even if you're unprepared. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.